So there are essentially two different ways that states govern their territories, either by unitary or federal government. And both lead to different spatial outcomes, and those outcomes are spicy, y'all. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, let's get to it. Okay, let's start by acknowledging that many states throughout the world carve up their territory like a Christmas ham into what are called subnational units. So the United States has 50 of these subnational units called states, which is endlessly confusing, I know, just stick with me. Or if we look at China, we can see that it's divided into 23 subnational units called provinces. And now that you understand that, let's start with a definition. Oh, and by the way, if you want note guys to follow along with this video and all my videos, check the link in the description. Okay, a unitary state concentrates political power in the central government, while the subnational units hold very little, if any, power. In other words, this is a top-down approach to political power. Big Daddy government sits on top and all the subnational units do his bidding. The central government makes all the policy decisions, and then those are applied throughout the territory without exception. Now, in terms of spatial organization, we usually see unitary governments in countries with smaller territories that also have a relatively homogeneous or similar culture. And why is that? Well, when the officials of a unitary state pass laws or regulations, that means they also need to make sure that everyone in the population is abiding by those laws. And so if a state has a massive sprawling territory, that's going to be pretty difficult to enforce. So that's why states like France and Japan and Saudi Arabia, along with a majority of states in the world, are unitary states. But, big but, massive but, the glaring exception to this rule is China, who has both a massive territory and a unitary government to rule everybody's crap. The national government makes all the rules, and then the provincial governors spread throughout the territory and who are appointed by the state make sure those rules are kept. Now, here's where I tell you that a unitary state has both advantages and disadvantages. As far as advantages, the main one for this kind of government is efficiency. There's a central point of power, and so policies can be passed and implemented throughout the territory with a whole lot more speed and less resistance than we see in federal states. But the primary disadvantage is that unitary states are typically more disconnected from the needs of local areas. Additionally, unitary states can often pass legislation that reflects the will of the majority without any consideration of minority voices. Okay, now the other main flavor of political organization is the federal state, and by definition, this describes a government in which political power is shared between a central government and regional governments. So, unlike unitary states, the subnational units in federal states have a lot more power to influence policy and the daily lives of those who live there. Now, in terms of spatial organization, we tend to see federal states in countries with large territories and some degree of cultural diversity. So, for example, the United States is a federal state. The national or federal government is located in the capital here in Washington, D.C., but every one of those 50 states also has its own state government with a governor and a legislature and a court system. So the federal government passes laws which affect the whole nation, but states also pass laws that affect only the residents of their state. And that means that federal states can often accommodate minority voices far better than unitary states can. Now, in terms of advantages, a federal state can be more responsive to regional and local needs. In the United States, one state can pass laws its own people want that don't affect any other state. For example, Florida has been making significant changes to their school curricula that reflect the will of the majority who live there. But those changes don't bleed into Georgia or Alabama or anywhere else, and that's a good thing because maybe citizens in those states don't agree with those changes. Additionally, and by the same reasoning, federal states can more easily accommodate different nations living within the state, especially if they are clustered regionally. But in terms of disadvantages, federal states can be slow to enact major policy changes because of the massive amount of negotiation that must occur between federal and subnational governments. And then another disadvantage is that in some cases, state laws can challenge national laws. For example, at the federal level in the United States, the recreational use and possession of marijuana is illegal. So if that law was passed in a unitary state like China, you better believe that every provincial governor would see to it that ain't nobody hitting that wacky tobacco. But here in the United States, 24 different state governments have legalized the substance. So don't miss how crazy that is. It's illegal in the United States as a country, but legal in all of these states that are subnational units of this country. Now, to be clear, according to the U.S. Constitution, the federal government's laws are supreme over state government's laws. So that means it's technically still illegal to possess marijuana in those states, but the federal government often doesn't enforce that national law. And that's a really good example of how different political entities in a federal state share power. Okay, click here to keep reviewing for Unit 4 and click here to grab my video note guides, which will help you cram all the content of this course firmly into your brain folds. I'm glad you came by, and I'll catch you on the flip-flop. Heimler out.